I've said it before and I'll say it again. God bless Texas. I've done several episodes about states reasserting their authority, and in a letter to Elijah Cummings and Jamie Raskin, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton fulfills the role of protecting the citizens of his state. He does this by standing up to an overreaching congressional committee and by simply telling them no. We'll discuss this next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello once again, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. We teach the rising generation to be free. I am glad you could join me. As always, head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. That's where I have everything Constitution Study. I want to thank everybody that helps out. I'm looking for more ways to have people volunteer and to assist the work that we're doing. Hopefully what you'll do is you'll do me a favor, you'll spread the word. Take this video, take this podcast, share it with others. Let them know that you can actually learn and understand the Constitution for yourself and see how our governments have been ignoring the Constitution and what we can do about it. I also want to let you know I love visiting locations. I love speaking to groups of people. So if you'd like me to come and speak at one of your events, you can go to the website, click on the events tab. You'll see request a speaker. Let me know the details. We'll see what we can work out. I'm still working for ways to fund some of my travel. So it's not even a question of can you afford it. I'm really trying to do this because I think this is an important message for all Americans. And with that, let's talk about Texas. See, the letter that the Texas AG sent was in reply to a demand by the House Committee on Oversight and Reform and its Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties to comply with a previous request for documents relating to the state of Texas efforts to combat election fraud. Now, election fraud is a serious issue, and I wish to focus here specifically on the Attorney General's response to the committee's request. Quote, turning to your renewed demand for privileged and confidential documents requested in your March 28, 2019 letter, Congress lacks constitutional authority to compel those documents from a sovereign state. This is so for at least 3 reasons. Hey, Texas AG Paxton will give 3 reasons why the committee's request is unconstitutional. Therefore, he's not going to comply with their request. First, quote, Texas is not a subdivision of the federal government. First, and most importantly, your letter fails to recognize that Texas is not a subdivision of the federal government or a private citizen. Texas does not draw its authority from the United States or the United States Constitution, but from its status as a dual sovereign within the Union. The Constitution grants some powers to the national government, but reserves for the individual states, quote, a residuary and inviolable sovereignty. See, we're taught that the federal government is supreme, but AG Paxton reminds the House and us that it's not. States are not subdivisions of the federal government. They are independent sovereigns with their own powers and own authorities. As James Madison noted in Federalist 39, quote, the proposed government cannot be deemed a national one since its jurisdiction extends to certain enumerated objects only and leaves the several states a residuary and inviolable sovereignty over all other objects. You see, the federal government has certain enumerated powers, leaving the remaining powers with the states that created it. See, using another quote from James Madison, this time Federalist 45, Mr. Paxton reminds Congress who created whom. Quote, far from being entities that exercise oversight of core functions of the state governments, each of the principal branches of the federal government owes its existence more or less to the favor of the state governments. The federal government is a creation of the states. In fact, it owes its very existence to the states, not the other way around. The federal government has no authority to order the states to do anything. Only the Constitution has the authority to force the states to do something. Or as A.G. Paxton puts it, legislative branch must yield to constitutional protections. Continuing, second, the committee does not acknowledge that where Congress's exercise of investigatory functions clash with another constitutional protection, the legislative need must outweigh the burden placed on that constitutional protection for the legislative need to prevail. See, Congress is a creation of the Constitution, and as such is subject to it. See, when a congressional power clashes with a constitutionally protected right, the Constitution must win. Congress cannot simply say they need something. According to A.G. Paxton, they need to show that their need outweighs the burden of protection in the Constitution. Now here I disagree with Mr. Paxton. See, when congressional power conflicts with the Constitution, it is the Constitution that must win, always. Unless the states decide to grant the federal government a new or expanded power through a constitutional amendment, Congress is prohibited from placing their needs or desires above the protections of the Constitution, period. Continuing on. Granting Congress the power to exercise oversight over the constitutional officers of a state engaged in the lawful exercise of that state's core authority would undermine the fabric of our system of dual sovereignty. In this case, the risk would be made particularly acute by the committee's attempt to force the constitutionally designated attorney for the state of Texas to divulge privileged and confidential communication with a client concerning the client's enforcement of Texas law. See, ultimately, the question is, can Congress order a state to do something in violation of the state's sovereignty? Can a congressional committee force a state to violate their own laws? Congress does have some oversight, at least some. Since only Congress can impeach or remove a federal officer, it's implied that they can investigate those in federal government. What Congress does not have is general oversight of the states. The only areas that Congress has oversight is where the states have delegated power to the federal government through the Constitution. Should the states allow Congress to assume general oversight of them, it would be the end of the republic. We would no longer be a union of sovereign states, but subjects of an all-powerful federal government. Third, the committee fails to identify any valid legislative purpose for its inquiry. Congress cannot simply make up a reason to do something. They are limited by their enumerated powers, powers that we gave them. Most important, the first line of defense to keep Congress, or actually any part of the federal government, from infringing on our rights are the states themselves. Quote, as the Supreme Court has rightly observed, Congress is not a law enforcement or trial agency, nor can it investigate solely for the personal aggrandizement of the investigators or to punish those investigated. The House of Representatives' own rules require inquiries to be, quote, related to and in furtherance of a legitimate task of Congress. The Constitution prohibits Congress from being a law enforcement or trial agency. That's what we have an executive and a judicial branch for. Where does it do this, you ask? Well, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 only allows Congress to pass laws to enforce the powers enumerated to them, or the rest of the federal government. Quote, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. See, though Congress passes the law, they are not given the power to enforce it. That's the executive branch. Neither do they determine guilt or innocence, except among their own members. That's the judicial branch. If the states were to allow Congress to become judge, jury, and executioner, then the separation of powers to protect our rights would be gone. Now, while I doubt this will make much difference to Mr. Paxton, I want to thank him for standing up for the citizens of this state. It is far past time more states work to protect their citizens from an ever-growing, ever-encroaching federal behemoth and return it to the subservient creation it was made to be. Those of you who are citizens of Texas, I hope you will support your Attorney General for this action and stand behind him should Congress decide to push the issue. That's our role as citizens of the United States, and in the case of Texas, your role as citizens of Texas. So I hope you like this particular message. I love it when states stand up to the federal government. We remember that the Constitution is a line in the sand, and it's really important that states learn to stand their ground, to stand up and recognize their purpose is to protect their citizens from the federal government. At least that's part of the reason they're there. So I'd love you to tell me what you think. Put in the comments below, are there other states that are standing up to the federal government? Are there states that are folding, and we really need to encourage them to stand up? Hey, maybe check out a couple of other videos. Subscribe. Let me know what you think. And always head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Ask a question. Let me know what you're thinking. And I want to see you here the next time on the Constitution Study.